I have this new rack in the back, and I got to pick it up at the factory where it was made thanks to one of your comments on Moving Vlog 9. I've moved everything out of my little 10-foot by 10-foot home office and into this studio. And the goal? To have space to work on projects I had to shelve at home, like working on the giant 60-drive Storinator. Another goal for 2024 is to make more videos with my dad for Gearling Engineering. And wait, you're not subscribed? Go subscribe over there too. We just did a tour of a 50 kilowatt AM transmitter site last month. It's worth a watch. But for Gearling Engineering, my dad and I put up this logo in the space. It's the logo he had created for his business, Gearling Engineering, back when I was born. He gave me the file off this ancient floppy disk and I blew it up for the wall. And I have this space over here marked off for an electronics desk, mostly so my dad can come and have some fun here too. We'll get to that, but there's a lot to cover today. Like always, use the chapter markers below to skip around and watch the parts you like most. So let's get started. I tried getting everything possible into moving boxes because it's a lot easier to just move boxes and stack them up. But I kept uncovering little things I had to take care of. Underneath all this mess, I had this thing that I had mailed to my dad. He was my first ever QSO, and I put the wrong address on it, so I'm going to readdress that and send that off to him after a couple months of not having it out to him. And my kids must have been excited at this point too. I even spotted one of their toys in with the boxes. One of the kids' toys is hanging around back there. I hope we don't accidentally take that to the office too. There are a few things that are staying though. After moving out all the clear boxes, I finally uncovered all my stickers I had been putting on this cabinet. Before I put this up, I started using this as my sticker wall. So you can see there's all kinds of fun stickers back here. You can't really see all of them. That'll be revealed, but this will turn into a sewing room, so I don't know if I'm going to take this thing with me or not. It was crazy how much stuff had accumulated in and around my desk too. But look at this. That was all in and under my desktop. That's crazy, and there's still the full rack with my PC, my Mac, my Switch. I mean, I had used that desk for a decade, first as a remote software architect, then it evolved into an electronics workbench where I also shot most of my videos. So I guess it's understandable there was so much clutter. Literally, starting with the key light here, this is all things that were in or on or attached under the desk. That was like 4 hours to get all that off of here. But it was moving day at last. It was actually a bit of a whirlwind, and I had forgotten to press record on the GoPro, so I only got a few minutes of the actual moving. I did record about an hour and a half while we were gone, but I won't bore you with that. The next day, I went back down to my old basement office, and almost everything was gone now. Well, it's empty now, and there's a lot more echo without those sound panels and without my desk, which used to be here. I also took down the guitar. That's sitting on the shelf over here. I don't know if I'll move it to the office or not, but so a little fun fact for people that haven't watched the channel for too long, there used to be a plant in the shot that I had, but the plant went out of the shot once I changed the angle and pointed over at this corner. But that plant's been there for 4 or 5 years now. It's been there for a long time. This room will be sewing and crafts for the kids, and that'll be what it is coming up, but not right now. Right now it's empty and echoey, and I need to vacuum it. But at the end of day 2, things were starting to come together. We're on day 2 of the move-in, and I have my desk over here. And then there's the main shooting area where we got the these sound panels up. I have a few more of them, but right now it already sounds pretty good in here. The HVAC is actually running. You might be able to hear it a little bit. One of the things that I'm hugely happy about is I bought these 2 Rubbermaid carts. I'm going to be able to work on a project on each one and wheel it around, and when it's time to do a video on it, I can just wheel it over here, set up the stuff on the desk, and then work on it. And I don't have to try to figure out how to put a server on this desk while I'm recording, which is pretty much impossible. These giant servers just don't fit on there, so I've had to work in my workshop, and there's not much room down there in my basement. So having this shooting area will be unbelievably helpful, and then eventually we're going to get the rack back in the rack room, the server room back there. And now, before I get to the big rack in the rack room, I learned something new about this little rack, the one I mentioned I got from a local high school. I wanted casters for it, and I was about to drill holes in the bottom when I noticed it already had some. Maybe there would already be a kit for it somewhere. Inside of the rack, there's a label that says the rack was made by Lowell, and looking them up, I found out they do in fact have a caster kit, so I ordered one. Now, completely unrelated, after moving Vlog 9 when I asked about getting a bigger rack, a comment by abozzay actually suggested I call Lowell. See, they're only like 30 minutes away from here in Pacific, Missouri. So I called them, and they sent over this massive rack. But before we get to it, I want to talk about Lowell. And before you skip the sponsored bit, give it a chance, especially if you like seeing manufacturing lines and giant lasers that cut through metal like butter. Lowell's a family-run business that's been around St. Louis since 1947, and they have a really cool factory. From giant rolls of raw metal to fully automated laser cutters and brakes, I was like a kid in a candy shop.
Lowell's been family-owned and operated for 80 years, and we represent the third generation in the
someday
business.
Maybe one of you guys.
Someday we will be taking the reins.
Yeah.
It's a family-oriented culture here, so we know everyone by name. We know what everyone does, know about all the different departments.
Thomas and Jarrett took me around the factory floor, and I got to meet some of the workers building their thousands of products. They have this giant, fully automated laser cutter, and it just churns through sheet metal all day. And nearby, there's also a giant automated punch press that cuts out thousands of parts every hour, and nothing goes to waste.
We get about a quarter for every dollar spent back on this. So we actually get to recycle this and reclaim value.
And do you recycle that in town somewhere?
We do, we
cool.
do. So we're monetizing it.
Yeah? They also have literal tons of brakes, from this giant Expert 150, where things get done eventually, to a state-of-the-art completely automated brake from Salvagnini. There's even a completely automated welding robot that complements the manual welding stations over here. Then, as we got to the back part of the factory, I could see the entire automated paint line. Workers hang parts at the start, then they go up into the washing station and ovens.
This is our 5-stage wash system. So by the time the parts come down to this area of the shop, parts are greasy, and they've got a lot of dirt and slime on them. We have to clean the parts off and get them charged and ready for paint. You're looking at 2 ovens here, so once the parts come out of the wash, it goes through a dry-off oven to get any residual moisture and chemical off of it. The parts begin to make their way to the actual paint booth.
Heading into the paint booth, we even found some of their rack cable management trays working their way inside. The paint booth mostly deals with black and white, but they can do other colors too for custom orders. This machine pulls paint out of one of these giant paint hoppers and sprays the paint in powder form in a literal cloud while the parts slowly move through. It's a lot quieter once you head into the warehouse, where they have thousands and thousands of parts ready to ship out. So if you order from their website after watching this video, chances are someone will go pick it and ship it right from these shelves. And it's cool to see a company like this making almost all their products onshore.
95% of the products in our line are indeed entirely made here in the US.
At the end of the tour, we finally came to my new rack. This is their first demo model of a new data center line they're making, the DAT24 series. There's a link below if you want to read more of its specs or look at its big brother, the DAT31. But these are true data center racks with cage nuts, movable rails, and access to every part. You can pop off side panels, get access to the back in tight spaces with split doors, and lock everything up. I'll get back to the rack, but our next challenge was getting this thing to the studio. Now, this might be more controversial than the diet soda comments in my last vlog. Diet Pepsi actually won round 1, by the way, but I'm just gonna say it. A minivan is better than a truck. I mean, it hauls up to 7 people pretty comfortably, but if you're not hauling people, you can haul full 4x8 sheets, fully enclosed and climate controlled. Oh, and it also fits this full data center rack, 46 inches deep, right in the back with enough room left over for a UPS too. So yeah, some people hate on minivans, but not me. These things are awesome. And it's probably not ideal to offload the rack with just 2 people. You may have noticed there were 4 guys loading it in at Lowell, but that didn't stop my friend Ben and I from trying. We didn't want to shatter the back window, and I hope my wife doesn't see this part of the video, but we eventually decided to just send it, and we got it out. Luckily the thing's on casters, so besides Ben probably tweaking his lower back here, getting it from the van into the space was a lot easier than just getting it out of the van. And, well, maybe there's a reason trucks have that nice truck bed outside the cabin. No backdoor glass or roof to worry about. So I concede on that point, but just barely. Anyway, thank Ben down in the comments for helping me get that thing wrestled into the space, and thank Lowell for sending the rack. If you're interested in any kind of racks, enclosures, or audio and power solutions, check out Lowell's website. They have a ton of cool products for every kind of install. But with the rack in my space finally, I had some time to get acquainted with it. Not only is it plenty big enough for me to fit inside, It has some nice features for getting at everything, from removable side panels on both sides to split doors on the back so it can fit in a tight space like this without taking off the doors. The top has brushes for cable entry, and here's one of those cable management bars we saw getting painted back in the factory. I put the rack against the wall, which I realized a bit later wasn't ideal, but then I leveled it with the feet built into the base. I still don't understand the physics of thousands of pounds of servers being supported by 4 little leveling feet, but if it works, it works. The next step was installing this UPS, a battery backup that also conditions the power going into my servers. Lowell actually white labels UPSs manufactured by Extreme Power Conversion under the brand Lowell Power. I haven't ever used this kind of UPS before, but I'll definitely report on how it works over the long term. It has a set of 4 batteries in this plastic tray, and I took them out before I installed the UPS just to save some weight. It's easier to install the UPS than install the batteries afterwards. It also came with this combo transfer switch and PDU that lets me bypass the UPS if I need to replace it. I put in the rack rails, they're just a simple kind that support the bottom of the UPS, and you know what? I kinda dinged this Doyle screwdriver when I compared it to the other ratcheting drivers last year, but it's not bad the more I use it. It's not great for computers, but having some hex drivers built right into the shaft means I can use it as a driver like this for rack mount gear or furniture a little easier than a driver like LTT's. In the end though, having a few different screwdrivers is still the best if you can afford it. After I got the UPS in the rack, I popped in the battery, and then of course I saved the best part for you to watch. I turned it on, and at least while it's charging the batteries, the fan runs. It's not loud, but it's definitely not silent either. Luckily, the fan stops after the battery's charged up, and I'm pretty pleased with it. If I do need to replace this UPS, I can do that without unplugging any servers as long as I plug everything through this bypass switch. Something a bit more controversial in the rack is this RGB strip I installed. After seeing Techno Tim's fancy home lab rack, I got the idea to put in some lighting for 2 reasons. First, it does look neat. And second, at least with subtle amounts of light, it does make visibility a little better. Of course, I'm not going to run it 24/7, that'd be wasteful. And I also want to integrate it into Home Assistant. Maybe I could even set segments red if there's a fault in the network or something. But Govee doesn't make that easy. Maybe I'll find a WLED controller for it though, we'll see. But if you saw the last video on the $1,000 to $100,000 server, you'll know the first server to go into this rack was the Storinator. My dad helped me get it installed, and that's when I found out for 2-man lifts, especially for a 36-inch deep server like this, we had to angle the rack out toward the door a little more. So it's not 90 degrees to the wall, but I'd rather make the rack a little more askew than damage my back muscles even more than they already are trying to install heavy servers while I'm bent over. But the big rack wasn't the only thing getting equipped. The mini network rack now has a MikroTik 10 gig switch. It's the same one I have at my desk, and it's perfect when you just need a few ports and light management. Between that and my patch panel, I added this neat patch, and of all things, the plastic neat patch box made me offer the blood sacrifice. I guess it realized I was cheating and using rack studs instead of cage nuts, so it decided to take over the responsibility of drawing blood. When I put those in, routed some of the patch cables through the neat patch, and eventually wound up here with an older Aruba PoE Plus switch filling in a little more space below. I have the Home Assistant Yellow and Netgear Wi-Fi AP plugged into that, so I can power those straight off PoE now. And I'm mostly using these monoprice Cat6a patch cables. The 30 gauge copper isn't quite as thick as a normal patch cable, but since it's only PoE Plus at 1 gig and not PoE++, I think they should be fine. If I upgrade to a 2.5 gig switch or need any PoE++ devices, I might rethink that decision. I don't like sending too much power over these tiny cables. But I also got to do something I've wanted to do for a long time and finally have all my patch cables handy on the wall using one of these patch cable holders. This one's from Frameworks, and the fingers are wide enough to hold Ethernet, DAC, and other patch cables. I also decided to pop a small pegboard next to it so I can store some cage nuts and a few tools right next to the rack. In the past, I'd have all this stuff in a box or a drawer, but now that I have a server closet, I thought I'd make it that much more efficient and just have everything on hand. The networking will probably evolve a bit, but right now my main goal is getting everything online fast. But I'll be working on VLANs and getting a high-speed connection over to this rack soon. Right now, there's literally a long direct attach cable dangling from the wall rack over to the Lowell rack. That's not ideal. What is ideal is the Ethernet runs. My dad actually brought his Fluke tester and we tested all the runs to the studio. They all passed with flying colors. Why would you want to use a tester like this instead of just plugging in the computer?
Well, because it can tell you faults and deficiencies. Some of the better testers can tell you deficiencies that you can't tell when using your computer. things that would cause data issues and slowing down your speed, your auto speed connections. So this is ID1. Go back, it'll tell you ID1 how many feet it is and all the connected wires, whether they're connected correctly.
How does it know how many feet the wire is? It's not going in there with a measuring tape.
Yeah, it does that magic transmission. I forget what that's called, TDR type stuff, so that it can tell where the fault would be too. So it can tell you usually about, where the fault is.
So that way, if we had a run here that was fine and it was like 80 feet, and then at 80 foot the fault was there, we would look on the other end of the cable.
Yeah.
But if it was 1 foot, it would be somewhere in here maybe.
Yeah, and if it said it was 12 feet and you knew it was not 12 feet, that would be a clue too. Jack 2, right?
Yep. We'll see if my numbering actually made it through from installation to now. We'll see.
I have high confidence.
I have relatively high. No, I don't have that set up in here. Number 2. Let's see. 60
feet. Boom. Perfectly wired 60 foot.
Yeah. All right. Number 3.
Perfect. 54 feet.
So 3 for 3. The other ones are not terminated yet on the other end, so we can't test them. Well, thanks, Mr. Fluke.
You're welcome. Wait, I'm not distracted.
And you can, of course, test your patch cables too. I don't know how many old patch cables I have laying around, but sometimes you grab one, plug it in, and you only get like 100 megabits. That's usually from a kink in the cable or a busted connector. So having one of these testers is pretty handy. And it even works with ancient RJ11 jacks.
Another trick that's fun is you can take, for those of us who still have to deal with silk cords for phones.
Wait a second, that only has 6 connectors. What good is that? It can't do Ethernet.
RJ11 are decades of phones that existed before cellular phones took over. A lot of these cables still in use by a lot of people. You can still test it because they will fit right in the center, and it will tell you, this is a very short cable, but it'll tell you that's connected correctly.
0 feet?
3 to 3, yeah, 0 feet.
So if you ever find one of these jacks on your wall, you can still test it with an Ethernet cable tester, and if you're okay with just 100 megabits, well, you could actually get that over one of these old wires. Moving on to the studio space, my main goal after moving everything in was being able to record and edit a video inside the studio. So the first task was setting up the editing desk, where I'm recording now. This is the desk I moved from home. Now, you can quickly run into a form of decision paralysis if you start radically changing up your workspace after a move, so I decided to put almost everything back exactly how it was at home, with one major exception. Since the power and Ethernet are on the left side of my new desk location, I moved my little mini rack over there. Cable management is a bit of a mess right now, but it is functional. One goal I do want to work on is getting a better desk recording setup. I might still record a few videos over here from time to time, so I bought an Elgato prompter, a new microphone, and this massive Manfrotto magic arm to mount it all onto a desk pull. I've had a little trouble with the microphone setup because when I plug it into my Sony camera, I get a buzz. There's some sort of ground loop caused by plugging my Sony camera into wall power. But why not just plug the mic into my computer? I could do that, but then I have to deal with the delayed HDMI signal coming out of my mirrorless camera. The audio would always be a few hundred milliseconds ahead of the video, but I'll work on that later. One thing that did work right away was this Third Reality Zigbee outlet. I put it under the desk, synced it to Home Assistant, then installed a Stream Deck plugin for Home Assistant. Now I have this desk cam button on the Stream Deck. When I press it, it turns on the outlet, which in turn turns on the camera. Am I lazy or is this genius? I don't know, it just saves me the time having to walk around the desk to turn on the camera. I also popped some sound panels on the wall near my desk and put up some pegboards in the area too. Again, just like the desk, I had an organization system for my camera gear that worked at home, so I pretty much replicated it here. Over time, I can make it more efficient, but for now, I don't want to waste time trying to reorganize everything. The last thing I did at my desk, since I didn't have any other storage set up in the studio yet, was plug in this flash store NAS. I was originally using it as an edit NAS for a few months, but every week or two I would get some error while editing a timeline in Final Cut Pro and I'd lose like 5 minutes of work. That got frustrating, so I decided to move the footage back to my Mac Studio for now, and the flash store is probably the most overkill time machine backup ever. I did pull out 6 of the SSDs just to save some power. There's no use having 12 terabytes of backup space on it running 24/7. I'm still working on this desk setup and might do a full tour sometime, but it was time to move on to the main recording set. It's all centered around this FlexiSpot E7Q. And yes, last video's sponsorship integration was a full 2 minutes long. I was happy to do it though because look around for a solid 4-leg sit-stand desk. There aren't many out there. Working with FlexiSpot on that sponsorship means I have this awesome new desk for the main shooting area. But a desk is just one thing I needed set up. I had to get lights and a microphone set up too, and that meant a C-stand. Now, when you're dealing with lights and C-stands, any seasoned grip will warn you about a few things, like the right-hand rule, where you always put the weight towards the right of the knob at the top of the pole, or the rule that you always put a sandbag on the tallest leg before you attach any lights. You'll notice I didn't do that, and the weight of the light wasn't directly above the longest leg. I wish I didn't just have a time-lapse of this. It's a perfect illustration of what not to do when you set up a C-stand. So of course, I grabbed a sandbag and threw it over the leg. All's well that ends well. But don't skimp on safety. There's a reason grips should be paid well. If they do their job wrong, people could actually die. And once I got all that stuff set up, I did my first real test recording. All right, everything's working. This is the new setup. It's a little barren back here for now, but I do have the eclipse picture over here, and I'll be working on kind of set decoration or whatever soon. I actually had a train roll by earlier while I was testing the microphone, and you can barely hear anything on the very low end bass, and I can just roll that off. The one thing that you can hear is the HVAC system. The HVAC is running, and there is a little bit of a rumble. It's enough to hit the noise gate on this voice processor, so I don't know if I can record with that running or not. Over the next week or so, I optimized the setup a bit and added this button. It's a little Aqara Zigbee button, and I set it to control everything over here. It controls the lights, the mic preamp, and power to my little Blackmagic recording monitor. And that's all done using another Third Reality Zigbee outlet. These things are really handy, and they even measure power consumption, which is a nice little side benefit. That way, I can just come over here, assuming my camera's set up on the tripod, and press a couple buttons to start recording. And I talked to Patrick from Serve the Home, and he convinced me to add in a rim light. So I popped this Amaran P60X on the ceiling grid and plugged it into the ceiling with another Zigbee outlet. So the setup is pretty nice. I have an Amaran 200X into a Light Dome 2 softbox for my key light, a 100X into a Godox softbox for fill, and then this P60X behind me over the shoulder for hair or a rim light. It's not going to win the Gerald Undone Award for lighting creativity, but it looks 1,000 times better than my old office lighting. And I originally had the eclipse picture over here, but you might have noticed it's now in my desk area. For now, I just have this Dalek poster and a sticker board behind me. The sticker board has almost 100 stickers on it already, and I'll keep adding on more stickers as I get them. I figure it's a fun way to acknowledge some of the companies and projects I've worked with in the past, and to add in a few Easter eggs from time to time. Like, did you know this little sheep up here is Uno, the mascot of Flocknote, where I worked for a couple years? Or there's this little upside-down mascot of Acquia Professional Services, where I worked on some huge Drupal projects. Almost every sticker up here has a history, and I like having a little of that history burned into my videos. The board itself is just a $10 hardboard with a whiteboard surface on the other side, and I mounted it on the wall using these standoff screws I bought off Amazon. I'm not super creative on set design, so expect things to change a little over time. I'm still not sure if I'm going to stick with a straight-on shot or go from an angled perspective yet. And after getting bonked in the head and cut on the knee patch, I realized if I ever get a bigger injury, it'd be a good idea to have some gauze and other supplies on hand, so I bought this little first aid kit. And I've been organizing and organizing, mostly focusing on the studio space for now. I bought this rolling parts bin thing from Harbor Freight, and it actually came together really nicely. With Harbor Freight, you get a 50-50 chance of something being a gem or a turd. And in this case, for the price, and if you have the space for it, it's amazing to have all these parts bins on a rolling cart. And I've already started loading up the top with junk too, like my extra bell from the Pi Bell Slapper project. With all this set up, the first full video I recorded here was the one on the Zega MAME gear. Until next time, I'm Jeff Geerling. So it's already pretty optimized, but I think there's a few more things that I can do to get this a little nicer. I also bought a new video tripod and dolly for the studio, both from SmallRig. It's nice to have a dedicated rolling teleprompter rig since I now have the space for it. But now, as explaining computers would say, that's it for another video. I'm still finishing up a lot of stuff, and we'll get a full tour soon. Oh, and I already had my first fire, albeit a small one. This SimpliSafe doorbell just burned up. I learned a lot about why it happened and hopefully how to prevent it from happening again, but we'll see. If you want the full story on all that, subscribe. And thanks again so much to both Lowell for sponsoring this video and to all my patrons, sponsors, and channel members. You made this whole thing possible. Until next time, I'm Jeff Geerling.